Hello friends, welcome to part 5 of our Azure Administrator Exam Practice Question Series. In today's session, we will dive into a diverse array of topics, including Azure storage accounts and their lifecycle management, Azure web apps, Microsoft Entra ID, Azure virtual machines, and alerts. I'll share strategies for tackling lifecycle management questions and show you how to eliminate incorrect options in Microsoft Entra ID scenarios as well. We will also discuss key networking concepts as we navigate through virtual machine related questions. So with such a wide range of topics covered, there is something valuable for everyone. So make sure to stick around until the end. Now let's jump right in with question number 91. You have an Azure subscription. You create the Azure storage account shown in the following exhibit. Now, in the exhibit, you have a screenshot basically showing you the creation of the storage account. Basically, the validation has passed and there are certain properties that you can see on the screen. Some of the notable properties are it is being created in a subscription named subscription 1 and the resource is created in the resource group RG1 where its location is North Europe and the storage account name is storage 16852. Now the notable properties are the account kind is storage V2, that is general purpose V2. The replication that is being used is locally redundant storage, which is LRS. And the access tier is hot. The connectivity method is private endpoint. You need to pay attention to the properties which are in this exhibit because the next question is based on the properties that are being chosen while creating this storage account. So let's look at the next part of this question. Select the answer choice that completes each statement based on the information provided in the screenshot in previous tab. Now, the first statement is the minimum number of copies of the storage account will be. Your options are 1, 2, 3, or 4. You would have seen in the properties of the storage account, it was mentioned that it is using the replication type as locally redundant storage. The locally redundant storage replicates your storage account 3 times within a single data center in the primary region. Therefore, the correct answer here would be 3. Now, the next statement is to reduce the cost of infrequently accessed data in the storage account, you must modify the access tier setting, performance setting, account kind setting, or replication setting. The correct answer here would be access tier as it has the cool option to store infrequently accessed data. But when the account was being created, you would have seen the tier that was chosen was hot tier, and it doesn't make sense to keep infrequently accessed data in hot tier. So to reduce the cost, you are going to modify the access tier setting and choose it as a cool tier. Let's look at next question. How can you efficiently transfer hundreds of terabytes of media files from your organization's online library to Azure? Given the limited bandwidth of your data center, your solution should be fast, cost-effective, and dependable, and it must ensure 25-bit encryption. What choice will you make? Your options are Databox Edge, upload using Azure Portal, import-export, Databox Heavy. There are lots of keywords in this question which you need to pay attention. The option that you are choosing must support and ensure you are using 256-bit encryption. It should be fast, cost-effective, and dependable. And also, you have limited bandwidth for your data center. So let's start by ruling out the incorrect options. Upload using Azure Portal. This option is not suitable for efficiently transferring hundreds of terabytes of data due to the limited bandwidth of your data center. Uploading such a large amount of data over the internet can be slow and costly. However, the question says you need to have a fast and cost-effective solution. This option may also lead to downtime and negatively impact other internet traffic. Additionally,
Ensuring 256-bit encryption for the data transfer might be challenging when using this method. Databox Edge. Databox Edge is designed for edge computing and data processing at the edge, rather than large-scale data transfer from an organization's data center to Azure. While it can be used for data transfer in certain scenarios, it's not the most efficient choice for transferring hundreds of terabytes of data, especially if the primary concern is limited bandwidth of your data center. So that's why it's very important to pay attention to the keywords in the question, because whatever is the requirement, it might be possible that you can accomplish it using all 4 options, but there is a keyword fast, cost effective, which might rule out some of the options. The third option, import export, it refers to the Azure service for offline data transfer, but it's generally used for smaller scale data transfer involving hard drives and shipping them to Azure. For hundreds of terabytes of data, this approach can become cumbersome and time consuming, which leaves us with only one correct answer, which is Databox Heavy, option D. Databox Heavy is the most suitable choice for effectively transferring hundreds of terabytes of media files from your organization's online library to Azure, especially when you have limited bandwidth in your data center and you have requirement to maintain 256-bit encryption. Next question. You have an Azure web app named App1. App1 has the deployment slots shown in the following table. Now the names are web app 1-prod and then the other one is web app 1-test. The function is for prod 1 is production, for test 1 is staging. You test several changes to app 1 in web app 1-test. You back up app 1. You swap web app 1-test for web app 1-prod and discover that app 1 is experiencing performance issues. You need to revert to the previous version of app 1 as quickly as possible. What should you do? Your options are clone app 1, redeploy app 1, swap the slots, restore the backup of app 1. To revert to the previous version of app 1 as quickly as possible after swapping web app 1-test for web app 1-prod and experiencing performance issues, you should use the swap the slots option. However, in this case, you will need to perform a reverse swap to undo the changes made during the previous swap. To do this, what you will do is, once you are in the Azure portal, you will go to the Azure web app, which is app 1 in this case, and you will click on the deployment slots of it. You will see the deployment slot listed there, and then you need to just click on swap button. In the swap blade that appears, you need to select web app 1-prod as the source slot and web app 1-test as the target slot. Make sure to select swap with preview option. This allows you to review the changes before the actual swap occurs. It will show you the changes that will be made during the swap. Now, as soon as you click the swap button, the reverse swap is initiated. This will effectively revert your production slot back to the previous version that was in web app 1-test, which was your backup. This process allows you to quickly revert to the last known good state without the performance issues. And the other options, which are cloning, redeploying, or restoring the backup, might be valid approaches in different scenarios. But given the context of swapping slots and the need for a quick rollback, using the swap the slots option with reverse swap is the most appropriate choice here. Question number 94 of the series. You have Azure Active Directory tenant named contoso.com that includes following users. Now the users are user 1 and 2, and their roles are cloud device administrator and user administrator. Contoso.com includes following Windows 10 devices. Devices are device 1 is Azure AD registered and device 2 is Azure AD joined. You create following security groups in contoso.com. Group 1 is having membership type as assigned and the owner is user 2. whereas group 2 has the membership type defined as dynamic device, and again, its owner is user 2. For each of the following statements, you need to select if the statement is true, otherwise you need to select no. The first statement is user 1 can add device 2 to group 1. This is incorrect, as even though user 1 is cloud device admin, but this role doesn't provide privileges to add joint devices. Now the next statement is user 2 can add device 1 to group 1. This one is correct, as user 2 is the owner of group 1, so can perform the necessary action. The third statement is user 2 can add device 2 to group 2. This is incorrect, as device 2 is a dynamic group and you cannot alter the ownership of a dynamic group manually. Let's look at next question. Your company wants to move all services to Azure Kubernetes service as part of application modernization. Which two of the following components contribute to the monthly Azure charge? Your options are networking resources, per deployed pod, master node, per node VM. When using Azure Kubernetes Service or AKS, the two components that contribute to the monthly Azure charges are networking resources and per node VM. Networking resources includes the cost of the networking resources you use within the AKS cluster, such as load balancers, public IPs, and data transfer in and out of your AKS cluster. Per node VM means you are charged for the virtual machine used as nodes in your AKS cluster. The number of nodes and their configuration size directly impacts the cost. You are billed for the compute resources of these VMs. Next question. Your Azure subscription contains an Azure storage account. You need to create an Azure container instance named container1 that will use a Docker image named image1. Image1 contains a Microsoft SQL Server instance that requires persistent storage. You need to configure a storage service for container1. What should you use? Your options are Azure Blob Storage, Azure Files, Azure Queue Storage, Azure Table Storage. To provide persistent storage for an Azure container instance running a Docker image that requires storage, you should use Azure Files. Azure Files allow you to create a share that can be mounted as a volume in an Azure container instance, providing a means of persistent storage. This is suitable for scenarios where you need to store data that should persist even if the container instance is stopped or deleted. In this case, since we are running a Microsoft SQL Server instance in a Docker container, Azure Files is a suitable choice for providing storage that can be accessed by the SQL Server container. Question number 97 of the series. You create the following resources in a subscription. The resources are an Azure Container Registry instance named Registry1, an Azure Kubernetes Service cluster named Cluster1. You create a container image named App1 on your administrative workstation. You need to deploy App1 to Cluster1. What should you do first? Your options are run the kubectl1 apply command, run the AZ-AKS create command, run the docker push command, create a host pool on Cluster1. To deploy a container image named App1 to an Azure Kubernetes service cluster named Cluster1, the first step you should take is run the docker push command. Once the container image is in Azure Container Registry, you can proceed with deploying it to Cluster1 using Kubernetes manifest and the kubectl apply command. Assuming you have the necessary Kubernetes deployment configuration file ready, you do not need to create a host pool on Cluster1 or use the AZ-AKS create command for this specific task, which is why the correct answer here is option C, run the docker push command. Next question. You have an Azure storage account named storage1 that contains a blob container. The blob container has a default access tier of hot. Storage1 contains a container named container1. You create lifecycle management rules in storage1 as shown in the following table. Now, the first rule, which is named as rule 1, the scope is limits blob by using filters, and there is a prefix match set on it, which is container/DevOps1. And the rule is if base blobs are not modified for 2 days, move to archive storage. If base blobs are not modified for 9 days, delete the blob. Then there is a rule 2, which applies to all blobs in storage 1, which means there is no prefix match applicable here. And the rule is if base blobs are not modified for 7 days, move to pool storage. If base blobs are not modified for 9 days, move to archive storage. So you perform the actions shown in the below table. On November 1, you upload 3 files named DevOps1 file 1, file 2, and file 3 to container 1. On November 2, you edit DevOps1 file 1 and file 3. And on November 3, you edit file 2. For each of the following statements below, you need to select if the statement is true, otherwise select no. And the first statement is, on November 10, you can read DevOps1 file 1. DevOps1 file 1 was effectively last modified on November 2. And based on its name, rule 1 will apply to it. So after 2 days, which is 5th November, it will be moved to archive tier. And then next transition happens on 9th day, which is after 10th of November. So it will still be in archive tier when you are trying to read it. And you cannot read the file without rehydrating it. So the statement is incorrect. Now the next statement is on November 10, you can read file2.docs. Rule 2 will apply to file 2, which was last modified on November 3. And based on rule 2, it will be in cool tier on 10th November. So you will be able to read it. Third statement is on November 10th, you can read file3.docs. Again, rule 2 will apply to file 3, which was last modified on November 2. And based on rule 2, it will be in cool tier on 10th November. So you will be able to read it. Which of the following are an element of template schema? Your options are parameters, includes, outputs, script. The elements of a template schema typically include parameters and outputs. Parameters are variables or inputs that can be defined when creating or using a template. They allow you to customize the behavior of the template by providing values for these parameters. Outputs are the results or data produced by a template after it has been executed. These outputs can be used for various purposes, such as displaying information or passing data to other parts of a workflow. You have an Azure virtual machine that has a single data disk. You have been tasked with attaching this data disk to another Azure VM. You need to make sure that your strategy allows for the virtual machines to be offline for the least amount of time possible. Which of the following is the action you should take first? Your options are stop the VM that the data disk must be attached to, detach the data disk, delete the VM that includes the data disk, stop the VM that includes the data disk. A VM in Azure has always its own OS disk. A single data disk means that it is using an additional disk configured to store data. So basically it has 2 disks and it won't cause any problem to detach the data disk and then reattach it to other VM. So the correct answer is option B. detach the data disks. You have an Azure subscription that contains a storage account named Storage1. The Storage1 account contains a file share named Share1. The subscription is linked to a hybrid Azure Active Directory tenant that contains a security group named Group1. You need to grant Group1 the storage file data SMB share elevated contributor role for Share1. What should you do first? Your options are grant share level permissions by using File Explorer, mount Share1 by using File Explorer, create a private endpoint, enable Azure Active Directory domain service authentication for Storage1. To grant Group1 the storage file data SMB share elevated contributor role for Share1 in an Azure storage account linked to a hybrid Azure AD tenant, you should enable Azure Active Directory domain services authentication for Storage1. Enabling Azure AD domain services authentication allows you to use Azure AD-based identities, including security groups like Group1, to manage access to Azure files SMB share. Once ADDS authentication is configured, you can assign Azure RBAC roles like storage file data SMB share elevated contributor to Azure AD security groups, granting them access to specific Azure resources like Share1. The other options, grant share level permissions by using File Explorer or mount Share1 by using File Explorer, are related to configuring configuring access from client machines, but do not grant RBAC roles. Creating a private endpoint is important for network security, but does not directly grant RBAC roles either, which is why the other three options are not correct in this case. Question number 102 of the series. Your on-premise network contains a VPN gateway. You have an Azure subscription that contains the resources shown in the following table. Now you have a resource named VGW1, which is of virtual network gateway type, and the description for the resource is gateway for site-to-site VPN to the on-premise network. Then you have a storage1, which is a storage account, and it has a standard performance tier defined. Then you have a virtual network VNet1, which has enabled forced tunneling. Then you have a virtual machine named VM1, which is connected to VNet1. You need to ensure that all the traffic from VM1 to Storage1 travels across the Microsoft backbone network. What should you configure? Whenever there is a mention of that the traffic needs to go through Microsoft backbone network, that essentially means that you need to avoid going through internet and have some private connection. Now the options here are Azure Virtual WAN, private endpoints, Azure Application Gateway, a network security group. As I mentioned, you can use private endpoints for your Azure storage accounts to allow clients on a virtual network to securely access data over a private link. The private endpoint uses a separate IP address from the VNet address space for each storage account service. Network traffic between the clients on the VNet and the storage account traverses over the VNet and a private link on the Microsoft backbone network, eliminating exposure from the public internet. Next question. You have an Azure AD tenant. You need to create a Microsoft 365 group that contains only members of marketing department in Egypt. How should you complete the dynamic membership rule? To answer, you need to select the appropriate options in the below command. The command is now on your screen. The correct answers are as follows. As the M365 group should exclusively include members of the marketing department and be restricted to individuals from the Egypt region, you will select user.department in the first dropdown to represent the department condition. To ensure that only users meeting both criteria are considered for group membership, you will establish an AND condition. ensuring both conditions are met before a user is added to the group. And -EQ is the third condition that you will choose because you want to make sure that only the users and marketing department of Egypt are included in the dynamic membership of the group. Question number 104 of the series. You have an Azure subscription that contains a storage account named Storage 1. The Storage 1 account contains a container named Container 1. You create a blob lifecycle rule named Rule 1. You need to configure Rule 1 to automatically move blobs that were not updated for 45 days from container to the cool access tier. So the condition here is you need to move the blobs to the cool access tier if they are not updated for 45 days. How should you complete the rule? To answer, select the appropriate options. Now you have a snippet of the ARM template where tier to cool is mentioned and then column 45 is mentioned, and then you have three options. The options are days after creation greater than, days after last access time greater than, and days after modification greater than. Since we are talking about moving to cool tier after the blob hasn't been updated for 45 days, then the correct answer among the choices would be days after modification greater than. Other options, which are days after creation greater than and days after last access time greater than, won't be correct choice in this case. Days after creation won't take into consideration a blob being modified after creation and will incorrectly move the blob to cool tier after 45 days from being created, even though it might have been modified after any number of days. Similarly, days after last access time greater than would again not take into consideration the modification, as there might be a situation where a blob is not modified for 45 days but accesses regularly. So it won't be moved to cool tier where it should have been moved. Now you have the second condition here. In the filters, in the blob types, you have three options: append blob, block blob, page blob. Tier to cool is only supported for block blob, making it the correct choice here. Now on your screen, there is a snippet from Microsoft website which confirms the action applicable to the blob types. As you can see, whether it's a tier to cool or it's tier to cold or it's tier to archive or it is enabled auto tier to hot from cool, they only support block blob. But when it comes to delete action, the support is for block blob and append blob as well. So this question can have multiple variations based on the action defined in the question condition. If the condition would have been delete, then obviously the answer would have changed from just block blob to block blob and append blob. Next question. You have an Azure subscription that contains a virtual machine named VM1. You plan to add a 1 TB data disk to VM that meets the following requirements. Your requirements are: provides data resiliency in the event of a data center outage, ensures that no data loss occurs if a host fails, provides the lowest latency and highest performance. You need to recommend which type of storage and host caching to configure for the new data disk. What will be your recommendation? Now, the first one is, this question has multiple sub-questions. So the first one is you need to tell which storage type you will choose. Your options are premium SSD that uses locally redundant storage. Then the next one is premium SSD that uses zone redundant storage. Third one is standard SSD that uses locally redundant storage. And the final storage type in the options is standard SSD that uses zone redundant storage. Based on the requirements for data resiliency, no data loss, lowest latency, and highest performance, the recommended storage type for the new 1 TB data disk on VM1 would be premium SSD that uses zone redundant storage. Let's look at each requirement and understand why I have chosen premium SSD that uses ZRS. Data resiliency. Zone redundant storage replicates your data across availability zones, ensuring data resiliency even in the event of a data center outage. This means that your data is stored in multiple physically separate locations within the same Azure region, which satisfies your first requirement of data resiliency. Now, the second requirement was no data loss. Premium SSDs are designed for high performance and low latency, and they offer data durability guarantees. In the event of a host failure, data loss is minimized because of the redundancy and resiliency features provided by Azure. Now, the third requirement is lowest latency and the highest performance. Premium SSDs provide the lowest latency and highest performance among the storage options. They are ideal for workloads that require fast input-output operations. Standard SSDs, on the other hand, provide a lower level of performance compared to premium SSDs, and they may not meet the performance requirements stated in this question. Additionally, locally redundant storage replicates data within a storage scale unit, but it does not provide the same level of resiliency as zone redundant storage, which is the reason option B is correct here. Premium SSD that uses zone redundant storage. Now, the next part of the question was host caching. The options you have are you either choose none, you either choose read only, or you choose read write. For this scenario, it is recommended to use read-only host caching. Read-only caching can help improve read performance while ensuring data consistency and minimizing the risk of data loss. Next question. You have an Azure virtual machine named VM1. VM1 was deployed by using a custom Azure Resource Manager template named arm1.json. You receive a notification that VM1 will be affected by maintenance. You need to move VM1 to a different host immediately. The solution you provide is from the update management blade, you click enable. Does this meet the goal? You need to choose between yes or no. Clicking enable from the update management blade will not meet the goal of immediately moving VM1 to a different host. You will need to redeploy the VM to move it to a different host. If the question would have been in the solution option you had, you will redeploy the VM to move it to a different host, then your answer would have been yes here. Question number 107 of the series. You have an Azure storage account named storage1 that contains a blob container named container1. You need to prevent new content added to container1 from being modified for 1 year. What should you configure? Your options are the access level, the access tier, an access policy, the access control IAM settings. To prevent new content added to container1 in your Azure storage account from being modified for 1 year, you should configure the access policy. The access policies allow you to set time-based restrictions on the operations that can be performed on the blob container. Let's look at next question. You have an Azure subscription. You are deploying an Azure Kubernetes service AKS cluster that will contain multiple pods. The pods will use Kubernetes networking. You need to restrict network traffic between the pods. What should you configure on the AKS cluster? Your options are Azure Network Policy, Calico Network Policy, Pod Security Policies, Application Security Group. To restrict network traffic between pods in an Azure Kubernetes cluster using Kubernetes networking, you should configure the Azure Network Policy. The other option mentioned are also related to security and network policy in Kubernetes, but they are not specific to AKS or directly address the pod-to-pod network traffic control. Calico network policy is a popular network plugin used with Kubernetes, but you would need to integrate it separately with AKS. It can be used for network policies, but it is not the built-in AKS solution. Pod security policies are used to control the security aspects of pods, such as what privileges they have, which important for overall cluster security. They do not directly control network traffic between pods. Application security groups are typically used in the context of Azure Network Security Groups, NSGs, to define network security rules for virtual machines. They are not used for controlling network traffic between pods in AKS, making them the incorrect choice here. Next question. You host a service with 2 Azure virtual machines. You discover that occasional outages cause your service to fail. What 2 actions can you do to minimize the impact of the outages? So you need to choose 2 options here. Your options are put the virtual machines in a scale set, add a network gateway, add a load balancer, add a third instance of the virtual machine, put the virtual machines in an availability set. To minimize the impact of occasional outages for a service hosted on Azure virtual machines, you can add a load balancer and put the virtual machines in an availability set, making these 2 the correct choices here. Load balancers distribute incoming network traffic across multiple virtual machines to ensure high availability and fault tolerance. By adding a load balancer, you can improve the service reliability and minimize the impact of outages by spreading traffic across multiple VMs. And the other option, the availability set, is a logical grouping of virtual machines in a data center to ensure that during planned or unplanned maintenance events, at least one virtual machine is available. By placing VMs in an availability set, you ensure that they are distributed across multiple fault domains and update domains, reducing the risk of outages caused by host level maintenance or failures. Now let's look at why other options are not correct. The first one being put the virtual machines in a scale set. A scale set is used to automatically adjust the number of virtual machines instances based on demand. While it can help with scaling, it doesn't inherently provide fault tolerance or high availability unless you configure it with an appropriate number of instances across availability zones. The next option, which is option B, add a network gateway. A network gateway is typically used for connecting on-premise networks or remote networks to Azure, and it does not directly address virtual machine high availability. Then option D, add a third instance of the virtual machine. While adding more virtual machine instances can help distribute the load, it doesn't inherently provide fault tolerance or high availability. The virtual machines need to be organized into an appropriate architecture or configuration to ensure high availability. So I hope, friends, you understand now why option C and option E are chosen as the correct options. If you still have any doubts in any of the questions which we have had in this series till now, please post them in the comment section and I'll answer them as soon as possible, as I always do. Meanwhile, let's look at question number 110 of the series. You have an Azure subscription named subscription 1. In subscription 1, you create an alert rule named alert 1. The alert 1 action group is configured as shown in the following exhibit. There is an exhibit on your screen which tells few details about the alert that has been configured. The alert 1 alert criteria is to be triggered every minute. So remember, because this is key to answer the questions which you'll just see. Alert 1 trigger criteria is to be triggered every minute. Now you need to select the answer choice that completes each statement based on the information presented in this graph. So the first statement is the number of email messages that alert 1 will send in an hour is, your options are 0, 4, 6, 12, and 60. Since the alert is triggered every minute, so it will generate 60 email messages in an hour. Now the next one is the number of SMS messages that alert 1 will send in an hour is, The options are same 0, 4, 6, 12, 60. You can't send more than one SMS every 5 minutes, so you will be able to send a maximum of 12 SMS in an hour. The rate limit that apply to alert, apart from the SMS one already mentioned, are you cannot make more than one voice call every 5 minutes, and you cannot send more than 100 emails in an hour.
I hope you found the contents in this video helpful. If you did, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us create more valuable content for you. If our content has helped you succeed, feel free to tag me in your LinkedIn success posts. This helps us grow within the community. And friends, if you would like to gain access to the PDF of full set of questions, then feel free to join the gold membership of the channel. And then email me at devopshub2023@gmail.com requesting your PDF copy. Stay tuned for more parts in the series and happy learning.